How's it going, everyone? I hope you're having a fantastic day. You know, I was just sitting here thinking about how I would write a tragedy in D&D. Because when you are creating stories or sandboxes or just a D&D setting, you can't exactly use that format because it isn't conducive to the promise of victory. You know, the heroes are expected to win in the end. That's kind of like a promised thing in D&D. So as a DM, I can't exactly write things that have a tragic nature without working very closely with my players. And then I started thinking about, well, how would a player do that? Because that would require them to kind of be deliberately making tragic decisions, and maybe does that still limit player agency? And then I started going down that rabbit hole further and further and further, and then I started to think about how I would play a tragic hero. And I thought I would make a video about that, so if that sounds interesting to you, then strap in, because that's what we're going to be doing. So without further ado, let's get into it. So let's define our terms. I define tragic as an end that leaves the outside observer, you know, players, GMs, the audience, etc., basically the people that set the status quo, feeling like the carrier ends their story worse than when they started. Like, for example, Arthas from Warcraft. In the context of D&D, it's expected that your character will end up being more heroic than when they started. Generally, players equate their own success with the PC success, and want them to succeed. And inversely, when a player character goes down a dark path or succumbs to temptation or fails at their mission, that can lead to players feeling like they themselves have failed or like they've lost at D&D somehow. But as we all know, you can't exactly lose at D&D, and that feeling does not need to be there. This diagram of a character arc generally fits what I find most players expect out of the character arc for the PCs that they create. They generally start off somewhere lower. In this case, probably most commonly, they start off selfish or ignorant, and then they go through challenges and setbacks, and then they come out the other end more selfless, transformed, and overall as better people by the end. And yes, that diagram is an excellent way to find yourself to a satisfying conclusion for your character, but it isn't the only way. Like, for instance, this graph that you're looking at right now, I like way better. The protagonist starts off one way, encounters challenges, undergoes a realization, and ends up transformed. This has no positive or negative connotations. You can absolutely transform a hero into a tragic villain, or have them undergo a transformation and fail in their mission using this structure and still have a satisfying ending. In other words, the arc of a character doesn't necessarily imply becoming a better person at the end. To understand this concept more fully, I want to talk about two characters in well-known entertainment media. I want to talk about Arthas from Warcraft 3, and I want to talk about Mulan from Disney's Mulan. We'll look at both these characters, compare and contrast them, and see where their choices diverge and why both of their stories are so incredibly satisfying to experience, even though one ends in absolute victory and one ends in complete tragedy. So let's start off with Mulan. As most stories start, she is presented with a setback. In this case, it is the setback of her family resenting her differences and the way that she doesn't quite fit in with her culture, and of course her father being drafted in the upcoming war. And despite her family's resentment, she selflessly risks her life to protect them. Now let's look at Arthas. Arthas is a prince of Lordaeron and a holy paladin, and he seems to act selflessly and care for his people, his friends, his country, and he passionately wants to defend them. But very quickly, we realize that Arthas has a huge flaw, and that is that he is immensely prideful. He ignores the advice of his mentor and closest friends, and he soon finds his desire to save his country and his people selfishly pushing him to bloodlust. And if you still want them to be sympathetic, which if you're playing them you probably do, make that selfishness based in a really relatable flaw, like pride or greed or lust, something that is very common in the world around you, something that we all can relate to and see how they got there. Admittedly, there are a lot of people that, just aren't very empathetic and won't be able to see these things, but at least it'll, do whatever works for you. Do whatever you need to do to make this character seem like not a snidely whiplash kind of a villain. Because if you create a character that is just pure, just unapologetically evil, you know, remember, you're still playing in a party game. You're playing with other people. And even though your character is going down the road of tragedy, they still, in a large part, through the vast majority, if not the entirety, need to still play along with the party's goals and aspirations in order for the game to work properly, in order for it to function. Because oftentimes actions that one PC makes affects the entire party. So if you're doing evil things and the rest of your party aren't making tragic heroes, or it isn't an evil campaign, it can get really annoying really quickly. So be sure that everything that you are doing is still in the party's best interest and that you aren't acting as a selfish player. You can have your character be selfish, but you, the player, need to be conscientious of everyone else you're playing with. And that is absolutely a tight rope to walk. And that is why often DMs don't allow evil characters in their games, because this is a really difficult thing to do. And if you talk to your GM beforehand about possibly making your hero have some kind of a tragic end, then things start to get really fun and are way easier. But, you know, if you're like me and you don't like to plan your characters at all, just start to notice the kind of behaviors your characters are showing, and if they are leaning a little bit more toward the selfish side, because if they are, then they could potentially be a very good candidate for a tragic end. After Mulan has proven that she is a true warrior and made friends with her fellow soldiers, as well as earned the respect and trust of her captain, she loses it all by having it revealed that she has been lying to all of them from the beginning. She was more or less prepared for this, and ultimately accepts the fate that befalls her, going as far as to lower her head for execution with no resistance. Each action that she takes only continues to prove her selflessness and her heroic nature, and she is rewarded for that in the form of not being executed. And after she survives, she heads home, successful in her original goal, but disgraced and dishonored. But then she sees enemies pop out of the frickin' snow, and they begin their march to assassinate the Emperor, and in reaction to this, she rides to the castle to protect her friends and save her Emperor. And if there were any doubt in her selfless and heroic nature, it is completely snuffed out by this point. Marching into the second danger absolutely did not benefit her. Yet, she did it anyway. Why? Because she's a hero. Compare that to Arthas, who seems to fight for his country and for his people, but he keeps letting his pride rule him, and his friends and his people suffer and die as a result. He's given so many chances to see the error of his ways, and it all comes to a head when a literal freaking prophet comes to him and tells him that what he is doing is wrong and it will lead to him and his country's downfall. And he's like, nah, man. Nah, I got this, you know? I'm not leaving my country behind. Which is funny because, you know, a little bit of a tangent, but then he immediately leaves his country behind. Never thought about that before. Neat.
I don't care if that madman has seen the future.
Finally, when an entire city is plagued with an undead curse, he orders his armies to murder everyone in the city in order to save them from a darker fate. This is the point of no return. This is the confirmation that he is a tragic hero, if not a villain. This is the next step in creating your tragic hero. You need to give them many chances to say no and have them keep going down the path of darkness. When you give them multiple chances, it makes their descent all the more heart-wrenching because they keep getting an opportunity to say no. Breaking Bad is another great example where Walter White just keeps freaking saying no. At the very beginning, his rich friend offers to pay for the cancer treatment, but he keeps cooking meth. Why? Because Walter White isn't a hero. And we're watching his descent. We're watching him break bad. That's the entire thing. And you know what? Breaking Bad was freaking awesome. I think most people would agree with that. After you've rejected the hero's path multiple times, that is generally a good time to let your GM and your players know, if they don't already, hey, I'm thinking that I'm gonna make my character a tragic hero or a future villain. I just want to see where this path leads me, and, you know, feel free to cut me out or let me know if I'm going too far. Just communicate with them. Let them know what you are trying to do with their character, and generally speaking, they should absolutely be on board. It'll be hard still, because, of course, when you do spend time with this character in game, you are going to grow attached. You do want to see them succeed, and that's what makes it all the more dramatic to see them continuously fail. And that, friends, is the meat and potatoes of storytelling. Juicy, juicy drama. And in that communication, be sure to acknowledge that you are aware that eventually this character will need to be removed from the party, either by some weird means or by death, and that the payoff that you are hoping to give the party is to present this character in a negative light. If you do that, then things will progress on their own. Of course, continuously don't be going against the party's wishes or try to sabotage their heroic things. You need to keep working with them. And as soon as that becomes no longer possible, and it will be abundantly clear when your character has reached that point, they need to get out of that party pretty quick. That's that's the next part of our journey. Mulan goes to the palace in hopes of stopping the Emperor's assassination, and she helps her comrades and joins them to thwart the assassination and kills the big bad evil guy in the process. The country recognizes her as a hero, and the Emperor himself bows before her. This is her reward. She has gone above and beyond and selflessly saved her friends, country, and people. Compare that to Arthas, who leaves his country and his people behind to go kill the demon responsible for the plague. And along the way, he finds an old friend that is unaware of what Arthas has become and literally sacrifices him to the Lich King in order to get his vengeance. Arthas then loses his soul, his humanity, and becomes the very evil he sought to destroy. This is his punishment for acting out of selfishness. This is the tragedy that befalls him, turning him to villainy and becoming the big bad evil guy. And this, GMs, is why any video game you play that generally involves choice rewards you for doing the morally good thing, because that is inherently the promise that we are given, that we have going into any story, is that you're rewarded for good things, good things happen to good people, and bad things happen to bad people. And as we all know, sadly, that's not exactly the way life works, but in our stories, daggone, that's the expectation. So once everyone at the table acknowledges that a PC is going to be a tragic hero, they can then take a step back and enjoy their tragic downfall and have that emotional gut-wrenching moment when they leave the party, or they lose their soul, or they get drunk and live on the city streets forever. Whatever the tragic end is, because you can't have a tragedy without a bad end. In the instance of Mulan, she returns home and finds their father accepting of her and has given her family the greatest of honor, and even brings back a potential love interest leading to marriage and children in the traditional happy ending. And that's exactly what it is. It's a happy ending. As opposed to Arthas, who lives on without a soul and betrays everyone that has ever known and cared for him.
What is this? What are you doing, my son?
Succeeding you, father.
He kills as many people as he can and eventually sets his sights on destroying the frickin' world. Eventually, armies and other heroes are gathered to stop him, and his plans eventually fail, and he's killed. Arthas does not have that happy ending. When you have a tragic hero in your D&D game, they can't have a happy ending. If they end up having a happy ending, they're not a tragic hero anymore. That's just a setback on the heroic journey. What makes a tragic hero tragic is that that's where they end. That's it. That's the story for them. And that's okay. Creating a character like that can be incredibly emotionally fulfilling for both yourself and everyone at the table. But if not done carefully and deliberately, then it can make a player feel like they have failed. it can make them feel like they've lost, like something has been taken from them. But when done well and deliberately, it can lead to some really amazing moments and some great stories down the line. In short, playing a tragic hero in D&D is definitely worth exploring if your table can pull it off. And that's it. That's the video on tragic heroes. I hope you learned something. I hope that this kind of half guide, half philosophy video was enough to at least pique your interest and maybe talk to your DM about trying out a tragic hero, seeing if you like it. It's true that it absolutely is not everyone's cup of tea, but I think that a lot of people just push it aside as not even a possibility. But when done right, it can be really fun, and I just wanted to make a video about it because those are the kind of stories that I definitely would want to explore. And if I had a DM that I worked with a lot, you bet your bottom dollar that I would talk with them about doing something like this. So what do you think? Have you played a tragic hero in your games? How did it feel? What was the experience like? Do you think everything I said was helpful or made sense? I would love to hear all of that in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And we hope to see you again very soon. Stay happy, stay healthy. We appreciate you all. Cheers.